The air in the Cheyenne Mountain complex tasted of chilled, recycled oxygen and the faint, electric tang of immense power. It was the scent of vigilance, a perfume worn by the men and women who watched the world from inside the hollowed-out heart of a mountain. Lieutenant Anya Sharma found it sterile. She preferred the smell of rain on hot asphalt, a memory from a life lived above ground. Her station was in the back, a small alcove of monitors tucked away from the main command floor. From here, she had a perfect view of the big board, a colossal screen that displayed a serene, blue marble of a planet, laced with the delicate orbits of satellites and the bold lines of continental borders. It was a god's eye view, and the men who stood on the raised dais at the center of the room carried themselves with the requisite divine arrogance. At the apex of this pantheon was Colonel Marcus Thorne. He was a man carved from granite and decorated with the ribbons of a dozen conflicts. His voice was a low rumble that commanded instant obedience, and his confidence was as vast and unassailable as the mountain that encased them. He paced the command floor like a restless predator, his coterie of subordinate officers, Major Evans and Captain Davies, orbiting him like nervous moons. Sharma, by contrast, was a study in quietude. Her uniform was crisp but unadorned, her black hair pulled back into a severe, functional bun. She was small, almost lost in the oversized tactical chair. The only thing that drew the eye was the object around her neck, a simple, dark blue data stick on a frayed paracord lanyard. It looked cheap, like a giveaway from a tech conference, a stark contrast to the billion-dollar technology humming around her. It was a source of quiet amusement for the others. The colonel's little pet rock. She ignored the whispers. Her focus was absolute, her gaze fixed on the cascading lines of code that scrolled across her screen. She wasn't watching the planet. She was listening to its digital heartbeat, searching for the telltale arrhythmia that preceded a catastrophe. For 3 days, she had felt a flutter, a ghost in the machine, a pattern so faint, so subtle, that it was less a piece of data and more a feeling of profound wrongness. Now it had a shape. She stood, her chair rolling back with a soft hiss. The movement, however small, was a disruption in the practiced stillness of the command center. Heads turned. Sharma walked the short distance to the command dais, her footsteps silent on the polished concrete floor. She stopped a respectful distance from the colonel. "Sir," she said. Her voice was low but clear, carrying easily in the acoustically perfect room. Colonel Thorne did not turn around. He continued his conversation with Major Evans, his gaze locked on the big board. It was a calculated display of dismissal. A test. "Sir," Sharma repeated, her tone unchanged. "I have a priority flag." This time, Thorne deigned to acknowledge her. He turned slowly, an expression of weary patience on his face. "What is it, Lieutenant? I've isolated the phantom signal I briefed you on yesterday. It's not a sensor ghost. It's a polymorphic tunneling worm, masking itself as background radiation. It's probing our national power grid." Major Evans let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound like tearing paper. He cut it off when Thorne shot him a glance, but the damage was done. The air thickened with condescension. Thorne sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. "Lieutenant Sharma, we have run diagnostics on every ghost you've chased for the past week. The result is always the same. Nothing. It's solar flares. It's atmospheric interference. It's a glitch in a 20-year-old satellite." He gestured vaguely at her station in the corner. "Logistics data is not threat intelligence. With respect, sir, the data stream is compromised. They're feeding us corrupted telemetry to hide the reconnaissance. This pattern is consistent with a pre-attack protocol I've studied." "Studied?" Thorne repeated the word as if it were an obscenity. "You studied it. In a classroom. Lieutenant, this is the real world. We deal in concrete threats, not academic theories. Stand down." "Sir, the vector." "Stand down." The words were granite chips. "You are cluttering my command floor with noise. Return to your station and monitor your supply chain requests. Leave the saving of the world to the people who have actually done it before." The coterie of mockers smiled. It was a familiar routine. the little lieutenant with her ghost stories. Sharma's face remained a mask of professional calm. She gave a curt nod. Yes, sir. She turned and walked back to her alcove. The quiet snickers followed her like a physical force. She sat down, her hands returning to her keyboard. Her eyes scanned the data, the wrongness of it screaming at her from the screen. Laugh now. You won't soon. An hour later, the pattern sharpened. It was no longer a flutter. It was a clear, rhythmic pulse. The worm wasn't just probing anymore. It was planting logic bombs, microscopic seeds of digital poison, into the substations and transfer nodes of the entire North American power grid. It was subtle, brilliant, and utterly terrifying. She stood up again. She walked back to the dais. The sense of déjà vu was thick enough to choke on. This time, the mockery began before she even spoke. Back for more, Lieutenant. Captain Davies smirked, not bothering to lower his voice. Did you find a typo in a shipping manifest? Thorne turned, his face a thundercloud. Sharma, what did I tell you? The threat has escalated, sir, she said, her voice a flat, factual line. They've breached the grid's primary control system. They're deploying dormant malware. I project a 70% probability of a coordinated shutdown event within the next 90 minutes. The colonel stared at her, his jaw tight. He looked less at her and more through her, as if she were a pane of dirty glass obscuring his view. He was a man who trusted his gut, and his gut trusted the clean, unambiguous lines of missile trajectories and troop movements on the big board. He did not trust this quiet, intense young woman with her tales of invisible enemies hiding in lines of code. Major Evans, Thorne said, his voice dangerously low, run a full diagnostic on our own internal network. I want to know if someone is feeding the lieutenant bad data. As a joke, he looked pointedly at Sharma, or if her console is malfunctioning. The insult was sharp, public, and designed to cut her off at the knees. It suggested she was either a fool or a malfunctioning piece of equipment. My console is fully operational, sir, Sharma stated, and the data is sourced from 3 independent satellite feeds. It's not a glitch. I wasn't asking for your opinion, Lieutenant, Thorne snapped. I was giving an order. I read your file, Sharma. Top of your class in theory, 0 field experience. You're trying to make a name for yourself with fairy tales. It's a common symptom of officers who can't handle the pressure. He took a step closer, his eyes falling on the data stick around her neck. What is that thing? Your good luck charm? Maybe you should rub it and wish for a real threat to appear, because you are wasting my time with imaginary ones. The command floor was silent now, watching the slow-motion execution. Humiliation was a spectator sport. Sharma's hand instinctively went to the data stick, her fingers closing around its smooth, cool plastic casing. Her expression did not change. Understood, sir, she said. She returned to her station. This time, the silence was worse than the laughter. It was the silence of a problem being contained, of an annoyance being dismissed for the final time. She watched Major Evans direct a tech to her console. They began running diagnostics, effectively locking her out of her own systems. She was sidelined, a ghost at her own desk. Behind her, Thorne's voice carried clearly. Get a psyche eval for the lieutenant on the duty roster for tomorrow. She's seeing things. I won't have my command center compromised by battlefield nerves from someone who has never even seen a battlefield. The words were the final nail. They weren't just a dismissal of her work. They were a dismissal of her person, her career, her sanity. The tech at her console finished his work. Diagnostics are clear, sir, he reported to Evans. Hardware is optimal. Then the problem isn't the hardware, Thorne said loudly, for everyone to hear. He walked over to her station himself, his presence looming over her. Lieutenant Sharma, you are hereby relieved of your duties for this shift. Your access to the primary threat analysis channels is revoked. You will stand in the corner of this room, and you will observe. You will learn what vigilance actually looks like. You will learn how real soldiers operate. He motioned, and with a few keystrokes from a nearby technician, her screens went blank, replaced by a single, stark message, access denied. It was a public, formal, and complete neutering. She had been declared a non-entity, a hazard. She stood up, her face betraying nothing. She walked to the designated corner, a place of shame near the emergency exit, and stood at parade rest. Her eyes, however, never left the big board, her mind racing, calculating, running through the cascading consequences of the colonel's monumental ignorance. They think they can break me. They'll learn. For 20 minutes, Anya Sharma stood in the corner. She became part of the wall, another fixture in a room full of them. The initial, intense scrutiny of the command staff faded. They had their drama, their little execution, and now the rhythm of the watch returned to its normal, steady beat. Colonel Thorne resumed his pacing, the crisis of the overeager lieutenant apparently averted. But Sharma was not observing how real soldiers operated. She was watching a countdown clock that only she could see. On her personal datapad, a device she was not supposed to have active, she was running a stripped-down version of her analysis program. It was slow, clunky, and lacked the processing power of her main console, but it was enough. The data it showed turned her blood to ice. The polymorphic worm was no longer dormant. It had awakened. Across the country, in thousands of anonymous network hubs, the malware was beginning to synchronize. It was a digital army waking for a decapitation strike. The attack wasn't 90 minutes away anymore. It was 5. Her program projected the outcome in stark, brutal terms. A cascading power failure starting on the East Coast, rolling west like a wave of darkness. Water purification plants would fail. Hospitals would lose primary and secondary power. Communications would collapse. Financial markets would evaporate. It was the end of the world as they knew it, and it would start in less time than it took to brew a pot of coffee. This was the final provocation. It wasn't about her pride anymore. It wasn't about the colonel's arrogance or the smirks of his sycophants. It was about the 300 million lives that were about to be thrown into chaos because of one man's ego. She pushed herself off the wall. Her movement was deliberate, calm. She walked out of the corner and onto the main floor. Thorne saw her immediately, his face contorted in a mask of pure fury. "I thought I gave you an order, Lieutenant. I told you to stand down." His voice boomed across the room. All activity ceased. Every eye was on her. 2 military police officers stationed near the entrance began to move in her direction, sensing the final line had been crossed. Sharma did not stop. She did not look at Thorne. Her gaze was fixed on the central command podium, the nerve center of the entire facility. She walked past the colonel as if he were a statue, her stride unwavering. "MPs, escort this officer to the brig." Thorne roared. "She is relieved of command." "That's an order." She reached the podium. She held up the simple data stick on its frayed lanyard, presenting it to the stunned senior officers. "Colonel," she said, her voice cutting through his rage with surgical precision, "you need to initiate Protocol Chimera. Now." The name hung in the air, meaningless and strange. Chimera? It sounded like something from a fantasy novel. Thorne stared at her, his rage momentarily replaced by bewilderment. "What in God's name are you talking about? There's no Protocol Chimera." He turned to the MPs. "Get her out of here. Now." The 2 police officers reached her. One placed a hand on her arm. It was in that exact moment that the world changed. A klaxon, sharp and insistent, blared from the communications console. It was a sound few in the room had ever heard outside of a drill. Master Sergeant Hayes, the grizzled NCO who ran the comms hub, ripped his headset off, his face pale. "Colonel, I have a priority 1 flash call," he shouted, his voice cracking with disbelief. It's the White House, sir. Authentication codes are confirmed. It's the President." A profound, absolute silence fell over the command center. The only sounds were the hum of the servers and the frantic beating of 200 hearts. Colonel Thorne froze, his hand half raised in a gesture to the MPs. The officer holding Sharma's arm let go as if he'd been burned. On the main speakers, "Sergeant," Thorne managed to choke out, his mind struggling to catch up with the impossible reality. Hayes nodded, his fingers flying across his console. A click, a hiss of static, and then a voice filled the room. It was unmistakable, etched into the nation's consciousness, strained, tense, but radiating authority. Thorne, this is the president. I don't have time for pleasantries. Is Lieutenant Anya Sharma in that room? Every single person turned to stare at the small, quiet woman standing at the podium. They looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. The unassuming officer from the back corner. The girl with the ghost stories and the cheap lanyard. Colonel Thorne's jaw worked, but no sound came out. His entire world, built on a foundation of hierarchy, procedure, and his own unquestioned superiority, had just been vaporized. The president's voice came again, sharper this time, impatient. Colonel, I need an answer. Is Lieutenant Sharma there? Sharma took a half-step forward. Sir, this is Lieutenant Sharma, she said, her own voice steady, a rock in a sea of chaos. A wave of audible relief washed through the speakers. Thank God. Lieutenant, I need to speak with you. Now. The request was a direct presidential override of the entire chain of command. It was a tactical nuclear strike on Colonel Thorne's authority. Master Sergeant Hayes, who had watched the drama unfold with a growing sense of unease, now looked at Sharma with something approaching reverence. He muttered the name she had said just moments before, a whisper that spread like wildfire among the nearby technicians. Chimera. I've heard rumors about that. A ghost program. Predictive intelligence. They said it was a myth. The whisper reached Thorne's ears. His face, already pale, turned the color of ash. He looked at the data stick in Sharma's hand. The good luck charm, the pet rock, he was beginning to understand, far too late, that he had not been talking to a junior lieutenant. He had been mocking a legend. The president's voice cut back in, addressed solely to her. Lieutenant, what's your assessment? This was her moment. This was the point of vindication. But there was no triumph on her face, no hint of, I told you so. There was only the mission. She stepped up to the main console, the one Thorne had guarded so jealously. Without a word, she slid her data stick into a protected access port. The room held its breath. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the big board, the multi-million-dollar display showing the serene blue earth, flickered and went dark. A collective gasp went through the room. When it came back to life a moment later, the familiar map was gone. In its place was something new. A terrifyingly elegant schematic of the North American power grid, glowing with a malevolent red light. Thousands of nodes pulsed in unison, a synchronized digital army preparing to strike. It was exactly the threat she had described, but seeing it laid bare with such stark clarity was horrifying. No one else had seen it. No one else even had the capability to see it. Sharma's fingers flew across the holographic interface, her movements economical and precise. A stream of data, complex and beautiful, flowed from her stick into the heart of NORAD systems. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm, authoritative, and utterly in command. It was the voice of someone who had left her rank far behind. Mr. President, this is Ghost 7, she said, the call sign falling from her lips with practiced ease. The Chimera event is active. The incursion is total. We are approximately 30 seconds from a cascading grid failure, initiating on the eastern seaboard. Ghost 7. The name echoed in the minds of the intelligence officers in the room. A phantom, the lead analyst of the mythical Chimera unit, a figure spoken of in hushed, classified briefings. They were said to be able to predict threats before they even materialized. They were ghost story told by intelligence veterans. And she was standing right here. I'm uploading countermeasures now, Sharma continued, her tone never wavering. The worm is polymorphic, but its core code has a fatal flaw. It relies on a quantum timing signal to synchronize. I'm broadcasting a false signal. It will force the entire network to attack at once, but it will attack a ghost target, a virtual grid I'm creating in system memory. It will expend all its energy on a non-existent target. The room watched mesmerized. On the big board, a second, ethereal grid of blue light appeared, superimposed over the red one. The red nodes pulsed violently. Then, as one, they surged toward the blue mirage. It was a digital charge into a phantom line. For 10 agonizing seconds, the red lines consumed the blue ones. It looked like a catastrophic failure. Major Evans let out a small, strangled cry. Then, as quickly as it began, it was over. The red lights on the board flickered, dimmed, and then one by one, they winked out of existence. The virus had burned itself out, attacking a shadow. The big board went dark again, then returned to its normal, placid display of the earth. The threat was gone, vanished. A long, shuddering sigh of collective relief filled the room. The crisis was over. A nationwide, civilization-ending catastrophe had been averted in less than a minute. Colonel Thorne stood frozen, a statue of broken pride. He stared at Sharma, at the woman he had belittled, humiliated, and tried to expel. His world was not just broken. It had been revealed as a dangerous illusion. His decades of experience, his medals, his gut instincts, all of it had been rendered worthless and pathetic in the face of her quiet, terrifying competence. He was a dinosaur who had just been shown the asteroid. Major Evans and Captain Davies were no better. They couldn't look at Sharma. They couldn't look at Thorne. They stared at their own polished boots, their faces burning with a shame so profound it was a physical presence. The jeers, the smirks, the condescending remarks, all of it now played back in their minds as the babbling of fools. The energy on the command floor had undergone a chemical change. The atmosphere of mockery had transmuted into one of stunned, reverential awe. The young airman who worked near Sharma's now-empty station looked at her not as a lieutenant, but as a mythical figure from a legend. He, and everyone else, had just watched a ghost save the world. The president's voice returned, and the relief in it was palpable, a warmth that spread through the chilled room. "Good work, Ghost 7. You just saved the country." There was a pause. "Colonel Thorne." The colonel flinched as if struck. Yes, Mr. President," he stammered, his booming voice reduced to a thin, reedy whisper. "You will give Lieutenant Sharma anything she requires," the president commanded, his tone now laced with ice. "Any resource, any personnel, unquestioning and immediate compliance. Is that understood?" "Yes, Mr. President." It was the hollow sound of complete and utter surrender. Sharma pulled her data stick from a port. The screen on the main console reverted to its standard display. She turned, her face as impassive as ever. She looked at Colonel Thorne, not with triumph, but with a quiet, professional finality. Her work here was done. She hadn't come to win. She had come to show them who she was. In the days that followed, a quiet, ruthless efficiency descended upon the Cheyenne Mountain complex. An official inquiry was launched, a swift and brutal affair conducted by men in dark suits who answered only to the White House. Colonel Marcus Thorne was its primary subject. His career, once a soaring monument to military achievement, was dismantled brick by brick. His log entries, his public dismissals of Sharma's warnings, his order to have her removed, it was all laid bare. There was no defense. His pride had nearly cost the nation everything. 2 weeks after the Chimera event, the reassignment orders came down. There was no public ceremony, no fanfare. Colonel Thorne was to be the new commander of the Thule Air Base in Greenland. It was a clean, cold, and permanent end to a storied career. He was being sent to the top of the world to be forgotten, a gatekeeper guarding an icy wasteland. It was a karmic death sentence. He packed his office in silence. The man who once commanded the nation's shield wall, now relegated to monitoring icebergs. Major Evans and Captain Davies met similar, if less dramatic, fates. Evans found himself overseeing logistics at a depot in the Mojave Desert. Davies was reassigned as a training officer for a reserve unit in Guam. They were scattered to the forgotten corners of the military empire, their association with Thorne a permanent stain on their records. Their coterie of mockery was broken, its members left to contemplate their own arrogance in humid, dusty isolation. Anya Sharma, meanwhile, became the center of a quiet storm of reverence. The story of the lieutenant who answered the president spread through the facility, then through the entire command structure, mutating into legend. She was no longer the quiet officer in the corner. She was Ghost 7, the woman who had stared into the abyss and made it blink. Generals visited the command center, their sole purpose to meet her. They would approach her with a deference that bordered on awe, asking for her analysis on threats they were only just beginning to comprehend. She was offered a promotion to captain, then major. She was offered a medal, the Distinguished Service Medal, personally approved by the president. She was offered command of her own intelligence division, a blank check to build a new unit in her own image. She politely and firmly refused it all. "My work is not here, sir," she told a bewildered four-star general. "Glory is a distraction." One morning, she was simply gone. Her station in the back corner was empty. Her locker was cleaned out. There was no farewell, no parting words. She had vanished back into the shadows from which she came, returning to the clandestine world of Project Chimera. She did not seek the spotlight. She had only stepped into it to avert a disaster. Now that the danger was past, she retreated, her purpose fulfilled. For her, the vindication was not in the accolades or the fall of her enemies. It was in the simple, silent fact that the country was still safe. The lights were still on. That was her reward. Her legacy, however, remained etched into the very culture of the mountain. Master Sergeant Hayes, the man who patched through the president's call, made her story a mandatory lesson for every new communications technician who served under him. You listen to everyone. He would drill into them, his voice gravelly with the memory of that day. I don't care if it's a four-star general or a brand-new airman. You listen. Arrogance is how the world ends. The young airman who had worked near her station, who had watched her silent endurance and spectacular vindication, was profoundly changed. He saw in her a new kind of soldier, one whose strength was not in their voice, but in their mind, not in their rank, but in their conviction. He submitted an application for a transfer to a specialized signals intelligence unit, the first step on a long and difficult path. He wanted to be like her. He wanted to learn to see the ghosts in the machine. Years later, long after most of the personnel from that day had moved on, new recruits being given a tour of the NORAD Command Center will be shown her old station. It was no longer a forgotten corner. It was a place of significance, almost a shrine. Tour guides would lower their voices and tell the story of the quiet lieutenant who saved the country from darkness with nothing but a frayed lanyard and the courage to speak truth to power. They told of how a colonel's pride nearly plunged the world into chaos, and how a call from the president revealed a hidden legend in their midst. The story served as a permanent, institutional reminder. The greatest threats are often the ones you can't see, and the most important voices are often the ones you refuse to hear. Anya Sharma was gone, a ghost once more, but her quiet, steely echo remained, a guardian spirit in the heart of the mountain.